One of my favorite topics, and I think one of the hot topics in our culture today, is the relationship between faith and science. You know, some scientists say that they have disproven the existence of God, while other people of faith claim to have scientific support for their beliefs. It's important, I believe it's important to have a handle on that so you can understand what people are saying and decide where does the weight of evidence and reasoning stand. Faith has a lot more credibility to it than science often gives it credit. So hello again, welcome back. A topic that has really caught my attention in the past few years is the relationship between faith and science. And there is an attitude in our culture that you can have faith and believe in science, and there are certain ways they try to reconcile the two, but actually there are problems with many of these approaches. The problems that people don't realize. There are some strengths, but there are a lot of weaknesses. And it's important, I believe, to understand the issue because a lot of people out there are losing their faith because of some of the things that science claims.
Okay.
And that's really a great tragedy. I really think it's from a lack of understanding science. And I'd like to address the relationship between faith and science from a critical scientific view. But before I get into the dynamics between faith and science and the evidence which supports faith over science, I'd like to look at some of the ways that people try to reconcile or try to define the relationship between faith and science.
Okay.
The first way, I think the most popular, or at least the method that has the most publicity most of the time, is the conflict view. And the conflict view tries to state that science and religion have always been in conflict. And science, they would even go farther to say, science has been the underdog persecuted by faith. That people of faith have always tried to quiet and hide and stifle the voice of science.
Now, by science, you mean creation specifically?
Well, the study of creation.
Okay.
You know, anything that, well, I'm going to get to in the next section.
So you're not talking about the science of engineering an automobile?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I'm talking about studying nature and coming up with explanations about why the things do the things they do.
Yep. Okay.
So a conflict, and it gives two examples. One is Galileo, when he tried to advocate the truth, really, that the earth revolves around the sun. Until that time, people believed that the earth was stationary in the center of the solar system and the sun and planets revolved around it. But Galileo could determine that no, the earth moves and the sun is stationary.
So I assume there's nothing, I mean, I haven't read the whole Bible front to back, that there is nothing in the Bible that says the earth is the center of the universe and everything else revolves around it.
Correct. Does not say that.
Okay.
It doesn't really talk about the center of the universe or the center of the solar system.
Okay.
But people had determined that by observation.
Yep.
In fact, at the time of Galileo, I believe the prominent belief was that the Earth is surrounded by a series of crystal spheres. And the planets and stars and the moon were all affixed to these crystal orbs, if you will, these crystal spheres. So you could see through them. You couldn't see the orbs, but things remained fixed on them, and they rotated, and they all rotated at different rates, which is why some things move through the sky faster or slower than others, and why sometimes things would seem to move backwards. That was their explanation at the time. But Galileo, with his telescope, looked at things and said, wait, that's not really the way it works.
Yep.
And the church, the Catholic Church at the time, forced him to recant. They put a lot of pressure on him. It's not that they disagreed, they just said, you have to recant. Now the other, I'm going to address that in a second, but the other conflict that this view tends to emphasize is the Scopes trials or the monkey trials. A substitute teacher named John Scopes was arrested. He was put in jail and tried for teaching the theory of creation. I'm sorry, the theory of evolution in the classroom.
Okay.
Which in Tennessee at that time was illegal. They were teaching creation.
So obviously part of the Bible Belt in the United States.
Tennessee, yep. And he simply took it upon himself to offer a counterpoint and taught the theory of evolution. And people were all up in arms. It's really interesting to note that 90 years later, we've done a complete switch, that they teach only evolution and the Big Bang in schools, and if you try to teach creation, you get in trouble.
Yep.
So, big irony there. Now, concerning these 2 points of conflict, there are a few other things to consider. Again, for Galileo, the Catholic Church did not disagree with his conclusion. They really had no problem with it. However, they knew that if it were to be made public in general knowledge, the general public would panic. They would be terrified at the prospect of sailing willy-nilly through space. What's going to keep us from flying out into the universe or crashing into the sun? It would cause a general panic. Nobody could do anything about it. Mm-hmm. And so society would fall into chaos, they figured. And as an example to support that, when Pope Gregory in the 7th or 8th century, when he redid the calendar, at the time people were using what was called the Julian calendar, which was developed by Julius Caesar.
Oh, really?
Yes.
One day we use the Julian calendar for our bread at work, so we know what day the bread was actually made, as opposed to having a date on it. It just has a number.
Oh.
We know that number is 136. Okay, that's the 136th day of the year, basically.
That's very interesting. Do you have 365?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That may be connected to the Julian calendar.
Well, today's July, so I better not have any 365-day bread, because then that's going to be 6 months old already, but yeah.
Well, you better check closely then. But the Julian calendar, it was more or less a solar calendar, but the solar calendar still, at the time, didn't really account for a process known as precession, which we do leap years because the angle of the Earth changes a little bit every day. I'll get into this, some other time, but basically you got to throw an extra day in there on occasion to make things work out correctly year by year by year. Well, the Julian calendar did not account for that. So Pope Gregory went to work and recalculated things, and he developed the Gregorian calendar, which we still use today. But in order to make everything reconcile, he had to cancel 2 weeks. In order for all the days to line up and everything, he had to jump from, say, July 1st to July 15th.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but the general public was in an uproar because they were saying, you've taken 2 weeks of our life. We're going to live 2 weeks shorter now. Yeah, the general public, they didn't have a real firm grasp on science.
Yeah.
But it does show that when general information is disseminated, sometimes the general public doesn't deal with it well. So the Catholic Church's effort to have Galileo recant wasn't really about squelching science. It was about what they thought was the public good. And as far as John Scopes goes, personally, I don't know about you, but personally I would say first, substitute teachers don't have a lot of power. They don't really have the right to make decisions about curriculum. They're there to take up the slack when the regular teacher is missing and to sort of pick up the baton until they're back.
So this is the guy in Tennessee we're talking about again?
The guy in Tennessee, yeah. John Scopes, Tennessee. He was a sub. And maybe substitute teachers had a little more oomph back then, but they're still substitute.
Yep.
And they're there to continue the teaching that the teacher would have been sharing if he'd been present. So for him to just say, hey, listen to this, kids, he's overstepping.
Yep.
And he is also flagrantly breaking the law. It was known that teaching evolution was illegal. Now, I don't agree with that. I believe that we should look at both and be able to compare them.
Yep.
And there is a precedent for changing laws. He ignored them. He took it all within his own power to introduce that. And I think that's the bigger issue. It's not so much that, the church is trying to stamp out the science. It's more a matter of, you broke the law, buddy, and you didn't follow any kind of protocol. This nation does have a protocol for changing laws.
Right.
He did not follow that.
Right.
Obviously, he was not a law professor, and so I really think that those things have to be considered. By the way, if you ever get a chance, Inherit the Wind is a play about the Scopes trials. Really very well done, and gives you some great insight into the debate, into the issue, into the mindset of the time.
Yep.
If you want to see, history up close and personal. So anyway, that's the view, that's what it's founded on. Some of the problems of this particular view, which most people discount at this point. Most people discount it because first, it is poorly founded, it is poorly supported. Again, they have two incidents that they point to make a general statement. They're saying, well, these are two examples of what happens all the time. No, it isn't. It is not. In fact, throughout most of history, it was people of faith who were paving the way for science. In fact, the first geneticist, if you will, was a monk. And I believe he was working with sweet peas or some sort of flower that flowered in either white or red. And he found that when he mixed them, he got pink. And that was the start of genetics, dominant genes, recessive genes, and so forth. But science and faith have, until recently, gone hand in hand. Sir Isaac Newton was a man of faith, and he defined science as observing and understanding God's creation. That was his view of it.
Yep.
So again, this whole thing about it being in conflict is I think inflated just to gain attention, just to gain sympathies. Also, a new trend in faith and science today is a number of recognized scholars. Many of them PhD scholars, which is about the highest you can get in your field. And these are people in fields of science. These people subscribing to the theory of creation, the precedent of creation. And there are really kind of two or three camps in this. One group is saying, really, they're not so much supporting creation, but they're saying, this theory of evolution from Darwin, it's a bunch of poppycock. It doesn't stand up. It can't stand up to its own criticism. We need to find something else. Now, there is a movement called Neo-Darwinism, which is trying to rewrite and update the theory of evolution and work in all of the details. But it's not a common trend. It's not a universally accepted trend by any means.
Okay.
The second group of scientists, they're saying, well, we believe basically in the creation story. We're not putting a real fine point on everything, but we think that creation makes a lot more sense than Big Bang and evolution.
Well, there had to be creation at some point.
Yes.
In the evolution story. is you have to go from nothing to life. So that's, even in their philosophies, I mean, there was a creation point.
Right. I'm not sure they call it creation. They call it a beginning point.
Yeah.
You know, this is what initiated it.
Yeah.
But of course, what initiated it, they can never get behind.
Right, yeah, because there's no way to recreate it that we know of.
Right, right. The third group of scientists, and I was fascinated by this, there's a third group of scientists that have actually published proof that the world was indeed created in 6 days. Not just a statement of faith, but saying, here is the proof. This is what we believe.
Why did it take God 6 days? Why didn't he just go?
Well, a good question.
Yeah.
But
I don't want to get a side.
Oh, no, it's an excellent question, and we don't really have a solid answer for that. But my take on it is the whole creative process. I mean, if you're going to paint a picture,
Yeah.
part of it is the whole art of painting it and creating it.
Yep.
I mean, you can go to Woolworths and buy a picture.
Woolworths, my goodness.
Oh, is that...
That's an old, what would you, department store?
Yes, sorry. Okay, you can go to Walmart and buy a picture. The two are kind of on a par with each other.
Maybe? About 40 years ago? Sure.
Okay, wow, okay. Yeah, I've got to stop mixing medication.
And I've heard you say that before, so you use Woolworths as a go-to for your department stores.
Yes, yeah, well, it was a big popular department store. My mom went to it all the time when she wanted to buy something.
And when my mom was a kid, she would go to Piggly Wiggly, you know, so.
Okay.
But there's none of those up here. But those are still around down in the south.
Okay.
Yeah, anyways.
As far as artwork goes, if you just want a piece of art,
Yep.
bada bing, you can have it instantly.
Yep.
Go to some store that sells it.
Right.
But if you're engaged in the creative process and you enjoy creating, you'll get out the paints and the brushes and do some dabbing and say, oh, that's not quite right. Let me try this over here. And it's a whole process in which you engage.
So you're saying that God would enjoy that process. It's not just a button that he presses in his mind saying this is done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Even though he does that several times throughout the Bible, I mean, this is the way it is. You know, and poof, there's fire on a bush for no reason.
Right.
He doesn't go, maybe I should have something come up close with a little ember on it, and, you know.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think the only insight we really have into his attitude toward creation is when he looks at what he's done and said, this is good.
Yeah.
And the word good means not just morally good, but aesthetically good. It's like, this is really enjoyable. This is pretty. So he is enjoying his work. And again, it's a lot more fun to make creation a process than just to get to the end of it.
Yep.
So, yes, that's why.
Okay.
I believe that's why. I think it bears itself out with it is good.
Yep.
But yeah, a lot of things happen we have to accept, or I believe the Bible states pretty clearly that yes, God was in charge of creation. And yeah, it took him a few days. There are other reasons I'll get into in another time.
Okay.
But yeah, it was good, and so it took him a little while. So the last one is scholars who are now subscribing to the 6-day creation. There's a lot more that I could get into. I think that's a pretty good introduction for faith and science for today.
Okay.
We'll look at a few more ways that people try to define the relationship between faith and science. And then we'll get into some of the ways that we can look at faith and science and see how actually faith has more evidence and is more credible. Faith is more credible than science.
Very good.